Flying with a Triple Ace. This is AviatorCast, episode 120.
Calling all aviators, you've landed at AviatorCast, the top podcast resource for interviews, refreshers, lessons, training topics, and more. Join weekly and share in our passion for flying things, exploring the rare air through flight. And now, another episode. Pre-flight complete, fuel on board, and flight plan filed. Let's kick the tires and light the fires. Here's your host, Chris Palmer.
Welcome, aviators. You've landed at AviatorCast. My name is Chris Palmer. When you sign up to be a pilot, you're joining a heritage that goes back to the very beginning. The pioneers of aviation were very much like us, with challenges, normal lives, and a great passion to be in the sky. It is the job of each of us to pass on that passion to the next generation. It doesn't have to be on a grand scale. Maybe it's just lending a helping hand to a few fellow locals that are struggling to get started in aviation, or lending your advice to those that are going through challenges you've been through yourself, and so on. And that's just the way it goes, around and around in a cycle, each aviator doing their part to make the skies a more friendly and safer place. So we are honored today to have the distinct privilege to speak with Colonel C.E. Bud Anderson on the show. Bud Anderson, among other things, was a World War II Triple Ace in the P-51, a test pilot who was good friends with Chuck Yeager and others, and a Vietnam vet. Bud's book, To Fly and Fight, will have you on the edge of your seat, planted inside a P-51 over the skies of Europe. Taking this step back in time, you'll find that Colonel Anderson has story after story of having to put his airmanship to the test, to the ultimate test, in literal life and death situations. He's been kind enough to share some of his stories today on the podcast, passing the torch like many in aviation have before. So we are honored to have him here, and we're going to be speaking with him in a few moments here. But first, AviatorCast is brought to you by Aviator Training, offering online ground school. Get the free downloadable private pilot action plan, 5 things to do before your first flight lesson. Sign up today at aviatortraining.com. Also remember that we have a giveaway that we do every single week, where we give away a t-shirt to someone that reads a review on the show. So if you're new to the show, then you'll be able to leave a review, and if I read your review on the show, then I'll send you a t-shirt. Leave that review on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, etc. And when I read your review, then you'll get in contact with me, and I will send you a t-shirt, okay? So today we have a review that comes to us from Aviation Reed from the USA, and he says, current 141 student. Wow, just wow. I couldn't be more impressed with an aviation podcast. I am currently enrolled at Flight Safety Academy in Vero Beach, Florida. I'm currently flying up to 6 times a week, and I'm constantly drinking aviation knowledge through a fire hose. It can be so overwhelming sometimes. However, I thankfully found this amazing AviatorCast, which has simplified things, kept me focused, given me new outlooks on certain circumstances, given me new goals to achieve, and most of all, its encouragement from Chris has been outstanding. Wait no more, subscribe, and fill your free time with some good aviation knowledge and encouragement. So, Aviation Reed, I hope that you are enjoying your training. It sounds like you're flying a lot, 6 times a week. You're really getting after it. So it definitely takes a lot of dedication. And when you're in training that deeply, sometimes you lose sight of what really matters. And so I'd imagine that kind of the passion part of what we talk about a lot here on AviatorCast is fairly motivating for you, and maybe a breath of fresh air in that deep training that you're going through. So good job for getting after it. Keep going. Send me an email, me@aviatorcast.com, and I'll make sure to line you up with that t-shirt. So we are going to get into the interview here with Colonel Bud Anderson. It's a real pleasure and an honor of mine to be able to speak with him today. You know, when I was a young lad, I used to play, I think I've mentioned this before, just showing you the difference in generations. I used to play a World War II video game when I was quite young. I had a joystick and a fairly fairly primitive computer to what we have nowadays. But I'd play this game called the European Air War. I'd jump in P-51s. I'd fly over the English Channel, and I'd go on these sorties, these missions. And just to think that coming full circle now, Bud Anderson is on my aviation podcast, a guy that has actually been there and done that, and has so many stories to tell. It's just such a great honor. I've always had World War II as part of what got me excited about aviation in the first place. You know, it was a time when everything was put on the line. Everyone had to really step up in that day, not only the pilots, but the people who designed these airplanes, the people who built these airplanes, the people who got these airplanes over to Europe to fight. So there's just so many pieces that had to come together, and I've always honored that generation. So again, it is my honor today to have with us Colonel C.E. Bud Anderson. So let's get into Hangar Talk with him.
Now, another great guest on Hangar Talk.
All right, everybody. We are honored to have a very special guest with us today. We have Colonel Bud Anderson. How you doing, Bud?
Pretty good.
Great. I know you're a busy guy, and actually saw you at Oshkosh this year as well, but there were hundreds of people around, and I couldn't exactly get to you, so it's just the way it is. But I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with us today. I know the listeners here on the podcast will really appreciate it. So,
Okay.
So I start out every podcast with asking how you fell in love with aviation. So let's go ahead and start there and rewind the clock a couple years and talk about those beginning years when you were falling in love with flying.
Well, I was just a little kid on the farm, and aviation was just becoming a thing. We're starting to carry the mail by air, and airplanes used to fly over the farm because I was under an airway. And I would see them and I'd wonder, well, boy, wouldn't that be something to be up there? And then there was a couple of airports, Sacramento and also in Oakland. And when I'd visit my grandparents in Oakland, sometimes the folks would take myself and my good buddy down to the airport and dump us off in the morning and then pick us up in the afternoon. And we'd spend the whole day just walking around and looking and climbing in airplanes that we shouldn't have been in. And the same way in Sacramento.
Now, was it pretty difficult those days to get into aviation? What was that like?
Well, there was no way I could fly because flying costs money. And growing up on a farm during the Depression, there wasn't much money. And so I thought, okay, I'll take a look at the services, and maybe I could learn how to fly that way. And I found out I had to be 20 years old, have 2 years of college, be physically fit, and unmarried. So I found a junior college in Sacramento, and I graduated from high school in 1939. So we kind of know what the world situation was then. Japan had started conquering their neighbors in the Orient, and Germany had started working on their neighbors in Europe. And so I took a technical course while I was there at the junior college that qualified me to be an aircraft mechanic. And so if I couldn't fly, maybe I could work on them. So the second year I was in college, a great thing happened to me. The government had a subsidized program where for I could learn how to fly, and it was reasonably cheap because it was free, but for the price of $9.50 for an insurance policy for my parents, I got a private pilot's license.
Jeez.
In those days, the requirement is the same as it is today, 45 hours.
Wow.
Except when you got to 45 hours, you took your test and you either passed or failed. And there's so much new information for pilots these days that now the average flying time for a private pilot's up around 70. So that's how I got started. And then the Sacramento Air Depot, later McClellan Air Force Base, was building up as an Army Air Corps unit, a depot. And they were hiring anybody that could turn a wrench. So they hired our entire class. And we went to work. We were the young kids, and they put us on the graveyard shift. And that lasted all the way through summer. And I'd just gotten back on days not too long ago. And then in December, I can remember it as vividly as ever. And everybody who served in World War II knows where they were on December 7th, 1941. Mm-hmm. And I had just been on days for a month or so. And I can remember like yesterday, the foreman came around and he said, okay, you, Bud Anderson, go home and come back at midnight. The Japs just attack us at Pearl Harbor. My God, I didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was. And so that minute we're off into the war. Now I'm still 19. And the next month of January, I turned 20. I went right to the recruiting station right there on the base, and on my birthday, and signed up. And a few days later, I was on my way.
So the kind of the call for everyone of that generation right after Pearl Harbor, it almost seemed like it was an obligation for people of your generation, correct? You had almost every friend that you had was capable was going to war. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, it was. Well, it was a patriotic thing. We young men rushed to recruiting stations and enlisted in mass. Whole entire high school classes. It was incredible. People wanted to do it. They wanted to do their part. This was a big deal.
So, if you can, and you have such a long history that unfortunately we're going to have to summarize some parts of it. But if you can talk about your training that you had in the Army Air Corps to get ready to go over to the European theater, let's get into that, what your training was like.
Yeah. Oh, just one other remark about the patriotism of some of our young men went to Canada before the war to try to sign up, learn how to fly, and go over to the Royal Air Force and help them out. Mm-hmm. As opposed to what happened in Vietnam when some of our young men went to Canada to get out of the war. What a contrast.
Yeah, just 30 years too. Pretty interesting.
Okay, my training, First of all, well, I went to Arizona for a short pre-flight where you got your uniforms and you learned your right foot from your left foot, and then immediately, of course, I'm thinking, man, I'm going to go to Florida or Texas or someplace a long ways away from the farm. Yeah, where do you think my first? I'm a California native. I live in Northern California, a little town of Auburn. Uh, when I grew up on the farm, it was about 7 miles away, and the nearest town was Newcastle, California. We had a PO box there, but I was raised on a farm, and I'm thinking, man, I'll go to Texas or Florida or somewhere for my training. Well, where do you think my first primary training in the Army Air Corps was? San Diego, California, about 4 south. And there we trained in the, wasn't even a military base, it was the Ryan School of Aeronautics. And there we flew the Ryan PT-22, open cockpit, no radio, pretty simple airplane. And so about 3 months there, and then another chance to travel, and I came north to Bakersfield, California, 400 miles closer to home. And there we flew the the Consolidated Vultee BT-13. It had a radio and a closed canopy. And there we started learning how to fly instruments under the hood in the back, formation flying, night flying, stuff like that. Still a pretty simple airplane, fixed landing gear, 2-position prop, and that was about it. Mm. So another 3 months, and I'm going to go to advanced flying school. Surely now I will go a long ways from home. But at least I got to the next state, and I went to Luke Army Airfield, which is now Luke Air Force Base, still an active military base today. And there we flew I flew a real airplane, North American AT-6. And I guess it was about 650 horses. Engine, constant speed prop, retractable landing gear, flaps, and of course a radio. And there was, and all during this time, I can't remember having any trouble with flying. It just seemed to, I think my first flying in the Piper Cub sort of set the standard, so to speak, of what to expect, to grow with it. And so in those days, we had, we needed and we needed pilots in every category that you can think of. Instructors, bomber pilots, cargo pilots, fighter pilots, you name it. And so if you could convince your instructor that you'd be a good fighter pilot, your chances of getting that were pretty good. And I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I'm not sure I know where that came from. Perhaps watching the newsreels of the Battle of Britain. And but then on the other hand, I thought, if I was in that airplane by myself, I would be the pilot, the navigator, the gunner, the bombardier, the radio man, you name it. I would be it. And I wouldn't have to depend on a crew for my survival. And besides that, I thought the fighters looked like cooler than the bombers. But so my first duty station, I went to again. Maybe I should travel somewhere. I went to the San Francisco Bay Area.
Wow.
About a 3 hour drive home. And I was stationed at Hamilton Field, but with duty at this Oakland Municipal Airport. And there we took over the terminal. We lived there, had our airplanes right there, and one hangar, and did our training there. My training was in the Bell P-39 Aero Cobra. And it was quite an advancement for me, because it had this marvelous new thing, the tricycle landing gear. Boy, did it make takeoff and landings and taxiing so much easier. It was an unusual airplane because it had the engine mounted right behind the pilot in the midship of the airplane. And that gave it a little bit of an FCG. So most of us know, I think, that that made the airplane a little unstable. I remember people used to say it would, the aircraft would tumble, go ass over tea kettle. Now, I never tumbled one, but I saw some guys racing over the field one time, and one of them fell out, and I'm pretty sure he probably thought he tumbled. After the war, when I got into the flight test business, we asked the Bell test pilots, would the P-39 tumble? And they said, well, we tried everything in the world to do to make them tumble, but we couldn't. Then they added a caveat. They said, but it sure did have some unusual post-stall gyrations. So maybe it's just in the terminology.
Could be covering their butts.
Yeah. P-39 was a very compact airplane. By having the engine in the midship, it left the whole nose section open, and they had a cannon system up there, and you could have a 20 millimeter or a 37 millimeter cannon with a fair amount of ammo for a cannon, and it fired right through the propeller hub. And going backwards, the engine ran a drive shaft down through the floor, sort of between your legs, you might say. And it came up to the bottom of the planetary gear and tied in there, which drove the propeller, and that left a big hole to mount the cannon through. And it had automobile type doors, and it actually had a little window, a crank, and you could crank it up down. You could put your arm out the window and taxi out for takeoff if you wanted to. It wasn't a very fast airplane, but it was the only thing I didn't have anything to compare it to. So I thought it was pretty cool. And it would go pretty fast in a straight down dive. You could get up to 400, maybe, I forget.
Mm.
Uh, uh, so what the deal was there? You usually trained for about 3 months, and then your class or your um, teammates uh, of that age and experience would then go off somewhere and fight the war in a real fighter group. And so when my time came up, they said, no, you, Bud Anderson, you're going to go to this brand new fighter group that's being activated for World War II for the very first time. And you're going to train here in the United States as a fighter group, and then go overseas as a fighter group.
Mm.
I didn't realize the importance of all this. It meant I was to be on the ground floor for promotions and things like that. I would be, as a minimum, a flight leader. I would be one of the guys that would be out in front when the stuff hit the fan.
Mm.
And but the big deal was I actually got another training cycle,
Mm.
and that was probably more important than anything else as far as survival meant. The more experience you have, the better you can fly, generally speaking. And so it was a big deal for me. And so we were in Nevada, and we came back to California and Santa Rosa, and then I went to Oroville, California, which is about a 2-hour drive from home.
Wow.
Take off with when we were still training in P-39s, and hold the ship of 4 down, and I could be over the farm in 10 minutes. And we used to do that quite a bit just to say hi. And then we went to, eventually we went to Casper, Wyoming, got our final training in, and then got on a troop train. We wondered where we'd go flying P-39s. They were in the South Pacific and also North Africa.
Mm.
So somewhere in there between the time we left Casper and got to New York, we learned we're going to England.
Mm.
And we're going to fly the brand new P-51 Bravo, the one with the thing with the Merlin engine in it. And wow, we were rather elated because we'd heard a lot of things about a Mustang, but we had not even seen one, let alone fly one. So that it gave a lot of excitement to us. And then we jumped on one of the largest ocean liners in the world, the Queen Elizabeth, sister ship to the Queen Mary, with 15,000 other troops.
Wow.
And headed for Europe. And I'm thinking, we hadn't won the Battle of the Atlantic yet. They were sinking our ships right and left. And I'm thinking, boy, this thing should be the prize target. And they must have a ring of submarines waiting for us out there.
Mm-hmm.
And we went out in broad daylight, blowing the horn and squirting, fireboat squirting water and all that stuff. holy smokes, we ought to go out of here at 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah, no kidding.
And but the things were so fast, they could cruise at something like 30 knots.
Wow, that's impressive.
And so they would zigzag, and I don't know how they exactly did it, but they evaded those submarines all the entire war. So we got into Scotland, and de-embarked. When we embarked, we were in a pier, and you couldn't really see the size of the ship. And when we debarked, we went out on some cargo doors down above the waterline, got out and got on a tug or something, and then headed for shore. And you look back at that thing, and it was huge.
Wow.
And we appreciated it a little bit more. Got on some troop train and headed for southern England, and got into our base. Our first base was, oh shoot, I forget the name of it. It doesn't matter. Yeah, nothing but Neeson huts and mud and water. Somewhere in here, we found out that we were going to be transferred to the 8th Air Force. We were going there in the 9th Air Force with the idea that these new Mustangs were going to the 9th to be ground support airplanes.
Mm.
Brilliant planning. And the air war at that time was taking a nosedive. The Army Air Corps had this great philosophy about how to defeat the enemy. The bombers could always get through, and we were going to go there in formation in daylight so we could bomb accurately with the Norden bomb sight and destroy the war-making capability of Germany, and the troops could just walk in.
Right.
Well, they didn't tell the Luftwaffe about this. The first thing you have to do is destroy the defenses, and in this case, being the Luftwaffe, or the German Air Force. And then we'll destroy them any way you can, but blow up the factories, blow up the airfields and all the airplanes on the ground, and that should take care of the defense, and then they could bomb at ease with acceptable losses the other war-making capabilities of Germany. I mean, acceptable losses, I never could figure out what that was. I guess it was okay as long as it wasn't you.
Yeah.
But so there's the air war was having a lot of problems, and we had fighters over there, but they couldn't go the distance as far as the bombers wanted to go. And and we were having these terrible losses, enough where we actually had a bombing halt in 1943 to kind of regroup and figure out what to do.
Mm.
And what they figured out to do is said, okay, we got to have these fighters, I guess. They actually thought they could do it without fighters at all. And so they said, well, we got these, we had P-38s and P-47s there, and of course Spitfires, but they were too short-legged. to go wherever they wanted to go.
You're in Europe, the Ninth Air Force, or at least you were going to go in the Ninth Air Force, and now you're going to go into the 8th Air Force as part of this regrouping, I guess, this new strategy.
What caused that was the Pioneer Mustang group, the first one in the Army Air Corps, was already in Germany in the in England in the Ninth Air Force, waiting for the invasion, so to speak. They said, "Oh my gosh, we got these Mustangs over here. We understand that they have a lot longer range. Why don't we try them for escort?"
Mm.
And so they were so wildly successful that the 8th Air Force demanded that they get Mustangs.
Yeah, no kidding.
The idea that had 15 fighter groups,
and
they were all P-38s or P-47s. At the end of the war, they were all Mustangs except one fighter group, the 56, which was the Pioneer Thunderbolt unit.
Mm-hmm.
I think they kept them just out of pride, you know. So now there's two significant things happened that had a big impact on the war. As we're coming around to the first of the year, 1944, the arrival of the Mustang, that's one. And two, the change of command where General Jimmy Doolittle took over the 8th Air Force. And what happened there was, the 8th Air Force has been run by bomber pilots, and they told us how to escort. And they said, no, we fly in these long columns with, in those days, there were 500-600 bombers and that many fighters. And they said, when you escort us, we want you to be around us. We want you to be close. We want to see you. When the enemy comes in, you drive them away and then come back to the escort immediately. You could actually follow them to 18,000 feet. If you hadn't shot them down, you had to break it off, come back up, and continue the escort. And that's the way we did it. And it went on and on. Well, when Doolittle got there, he had a little different philosophy about warfare and maybe a little more flexibility. We were starting to get more bomber crews and more airplanes and more Mustangs. And he said, okay, you fighter pilots, from now on, when you engage the enemy, start to drive them away, you follow them to the ground, pursue and destroy, follow the ground and kill them. And believe it or not, the way we got air superiority over the German Air Force, which we had to do first before you could invade Europe.
Right, yep.
We had to get air superiority. And the way we did it was not through the bombings necessarily. We actually killed the Luftwaffe's experienced pilots enough where they could not put up a major, operation. And that's still air power, but it's certainly a different way of doing it.
So by killing the experienced German pilots, that then started kind of a cascade effect where then the Germans had to start choosing which aircraft they attacked, right? And then the bombers could get in and attack more with more success and accuracy. Is that correct?
Well, I think it was more that they had acceptable losses.
Okay.
And so there, then they could go anywhere they wanted, and they could go deep into Germany. We could take them to Poland, Czechoslovakia. You name it. We could follow them in and out.
Wow,
It was a great deal.
So, talk to us a little bit about the first time you flew a P-51. Do you remember that experience still?
It's a little fuzzy in my mind. I had lost my very best friend that we grew up together, and he was actually he joined a year after I did, but he got into combat before I did. And he was killed in a P-38 over Bremen in November of 43, and that's when I was just arriving in the theater. And I think it had an emotional impact on me, and I remember doing it, but and remembering what a great airplane the thing was. We had something to compare it to, the
Right.
P-39. And it was an incredible airplane. It was good down low, good up at high altitude. Had a two-stage, two-speed, two-stage supercharger. A low blower up to about 18,000 feet, and then you could cut in the high blower, and it could take you up to, I've had them above 40,000 feet.
Holy, that's amazing. And that was a large tactical advantage, right? To be that high and then come down in on the German fighters?
Well, yeah, but what we did was we still stayed close to the bombers.
Okay.
Because that's where they're going to come.
Sure, yeah.
Bait.
It's like flies just swarming to the nest.
Yeah.
So, talk to us a little bit about your first dogfighting experiences. Those very first times that you were getting into it, hot and heavy.
It's kind of a humorous one. They took our squadron commanders and operations officers and flight leaders, and we went down to the 354th, the Pioneer Mustang group, and we filled in and be a wingman or primarily just a wingman, and we'd get our first experience that way. And then we'd come back with our fighter group, and then they would send a group leader with some combat experience, and then he would take us over on our first missions. I can remember now. Don't get lost. Whatever. If you got lost over there, your chances of survival went way down. If you survived about 5 to 10 missions, your chance of survival went way up. Well, this was supposed to give us an edge, the ones that were going down there to the 354th group. So I get into this flight. It was one of my classmates, and he'd already had a couple of kills. And so I'm hoping, well, we'll probably go across the channel and run up and down and, get broken in that way. I get down there, and we're going to Frankfurt, Germany.
Oh, jeez.
And holy smokes, we'll surely see some action on this one. So we get down there, we escort them, and all of a sudden people start calling in bogeys. Hell, I didn't see a thing. I was trying to find them, at 12 o'clock high and 9 o'clock low and all that. I couldn't see a thing. And I had really super eyesight. I had better than 20/20 in both eyes. And I did have a knack of being able to see an airplane.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh boy, I don't want to get lost. So I'm just going along with my flight leader. And all of a sudden, somebody says, "Okay, here comes some from 12 o'clock low." And my flight leader rolls up over, and I'm following him. I'm right on his wing over here, upside down. And I look down, and here comes a Focke-Wulf 190, just a robin blue with black crosses on it. Wow, I'm going to get a ringside seat here. Flight lead, he pulls out underneath and gets in the trail with him, and I'm hanging out there pretty close to where a wingman should be, but I moved in a little bit because I didn't want to get lost, and so he's just now getting close to him, and somebody screams out over the radio, "Mustang, Mustang! There's one on your tail." Not blue leader. There's somebody on your tail.
Mm-hmm.
Mustang, very generic. And how many? There's 48 Mustangs up there.
Yeah.
And so, we got my attention, and I slid out and tried to look back, but I didn't want to lose him, so I got in there again, and he's still chasing this guy. And he says, "Mustang, Mustang, he's still on your tail." And holy smokes, maybe he's talking about me,
Mm-hmm.
And my flight leader is getting worried about it. So he fired a long burst and went into evasive action. And so I'm right with him, but boy, he left me. And I wake up, so to speak.
Yeah.
And here I am over Germany. I get no airplanes, and I'm just absolutely all alone. Just the thing you're not supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh boy, I started looking around really carefully. Pretty soon I saw another Mustang, and I went up and joined him, and it was my wingman. Well, we got home that night. We never found out anything about who that guy was that was yelling, "Mustang, Mustang, one on your tail." But I had survived. I probably hadn't performed as good, but I swung out and said, "Okay, blue lead, it's not you. Go on, go get that guy." And of course, he was upset because it probably cost him a kill.
Mm.
And so that's my initial, my first mission.
Yeah.
And my first engagement with the enemy.
Wow. So you had how many kills were there to your credit once everything was said and done?
16 and a quarter.
So to become an ace, you need 5. Is that correct?
In aerial combat.
Okay. So you're a triple ace. Where does the 1 quarter come from? How does that work?
Well, you share it with your whole flight.
Tell me about some of your more memorable kills that you had.
Well, they're all memorable.
I'm sure they are. Yeah, I wish we had time for every one, but
probably my most exciting one would have been in May of 44, about a month or so before the invasion. And we were going on a deep penetration way down in southern Germany, almost to Switzerland. And it was spring, very bright and green, just forest and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Although that doesn't have much to do with this story. And I'm escort. We were on the close escort. We still put guys right over the bombers, but what that did was allowed other guys to go out and try to find these big formations of 100, 200, or 300 more Germans that would form up in a big gaggle and then try to come head on through the bombers, spaced.
Mm.
And but I'm on this close escort. And so we were zigzagging, and we just made a good left-hand turn, my flight of 4. And somebody screams out, bogeys, 5 o'clock high, coming down on us.
Wow.
And just as I look back, my wingman actually is the guy that called him in. And I saw them immediately, and they were ME-109Gs, as it turned out, their best high-altitude fighter. And we're up there at 30,000 probably. And so I see them coming. Yeah, my hands are showing. We're turning this way, and they're coming down right on top of us. Well, that's very vulnerable. They could just slide to our rear. Well, they were here, so I make a hard right this way, and that put my flight into string formation. 1, 2, 3, 4 in tail chase. And sure enough, here they came. They were in string formation, and they came down. We went head on through them. Nobody could get a shot off. And I think, oh man, they're going to go down through the bombers, and they're gone. But I made a left turn and looked across, and sure enough, they wanted to turn. They started a left-hand turn. They were attacking us, and they're sticking with it. So the Mustang, this is right near where you want to be with a Mustang. You could get a lot of power, and it could turn tighter than the Germans could at altitude. Down low, the 109 in the hands of a good pilot could give a Mustang a hard time. So after about 2 turns, I'm closing on them. I get closer and closer as I come around. And they saw that, so they rolled out and just tried to accelerate straight and level at altitude. We're probably up now a good 30,000. And so we follow in behind. We're just following on the trail. And there I've got a pretty good speed advantage over them. Eventually, you had to chase them.
Yeah.
And so I'm getting there, and the number 4 guy makes a climb like this, climbs out of the trail. Well, if we go straight ahead, he could drop down on us. So I sent up my number 3 and 4. I said, "You guys go after him, and my wingman, me and my wingman will chase the 3." So they did, and they shot him down and joined us later on. So now I got, classic way you want to get a kill. Just get in here at 6 o'clock, close into 300 yards, and fire. And they think they can outrun us because they got the G model. And so I just closed into this last guy, gave him a long burst, and got him smoking bad. And then I saw him, and he rolls over and flies upside down and holding it. And I thought, what the heck's he doing? I guess he was a air show pilot or something. But it didn't matter. I'm sitting there right side up very comfortably, closed in a little more, and gave him another good shot, and he's gone. So now I got two guys up there, and they're kind of dancing around. I guess they're trying to look back. I sat in a 109 many, many years later in Long Beach. Where they had And I sat in it and put that big, heavy canopy down.
Yeah.
And it was like this. You could hardly turn your head at all to see backward.
Wow.
Oh, I wish I'd have done that before I'd got in combat.
Yeah, no kidding.
So they were skidding like this, trying to look backwards.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I got closer, one of them ran, and one of them made a hard left climbing turn. And I said, well, okay, I'm going to go after this guy. And by the time I got up there, he's in this. I'm coming at him at almost 90 degrees. Well, you can't. It'd be a heck of a turn to get on his tail right there. So I said, well, he's going there. I'm just going to cut across his path and climb, and then he'll be out here to my left, and I'll be able to look back, and if he dives away, I can chase him.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened, he reversed his turn and came up underneath us.
Mm.
Holy smokes here, I thought, well, I had plenty of energy. I'd made a fairly gentle pull-up. Well, he'd made a very hard turn this way, reversed his turn this way, and up. So he's lost a lot of energy.
Right.
But he's behind us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not good.
And that got me to thinking about Plan B.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sitting up there watching him, and all of a sudden I see him go over here after my wingman coming up on my right side. So I told John, hey, you better take evasive action, and I'll cover you and maybe sandwich him in between us and get him that way. And sure enough, that's what happened. John went down there, and he was rolling, and the ME-109 dropped on his tail, and so I just dropped on the ME-109 tail. So he sees that right away, and the German, and he breaks a hard left again. And I thought, well, I think I outzoomed him last time. I think I'll do the same thing, cut across his path and pull up, and then see what he's going to do. And sure enough, he follows the same thing. He makes a hard right underneath and starts to pull up after me. And I'm going. And I really got everything going full firewall. I'm sure he knows. And he's below me. And to get a good shot, he has to get up here and lead me.
Mm.
So we're both going up like this together, but steeper and steeper and steeper.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what happens when you do that, especially we were losing airspeed at a tremendous rate. And the first guy that stalls out, is going to be in trouble.
Mm.
If I stall out, I'm going to drop down and he can get me. If he stalls out, I'll reverse and get on his tail again.
Mm.
And sure enough, that's what happened. So he's stalled, and we reversed things, and we're going downhill again like this. He's quite a ways ahead of me. And he breaks hard left again. And this time I thought, it was a little bit different. It wasn't 90 degrees. I'm getting back here maybe at 60 degrees.
Mm.
And I'm thinking, hey, I might be able to get inside of him this time and get a shot. And so I pull inside of him, and it looks like I might be able to do it. And I'm sure he looked back and saw me and straightened it out. That held my angle off. Now I'm right on his tail.
Mm.
And pulls it up as steep as he possibly could. And I don't know whether he thought maybe I came off on the throttle, dropped flaps, to get inside of him, but I was still back there at wide open throttle.
Mm.
And so when he did that, I'm just zooming right up behind him, and he's up here, and I'm pulling up here, fired a burst, and I saw a couple of tracers go out on his off his right wing, fed in a little left rudder, and got hit all over the cockpit, engine, wing root. Really hit him severely, and he's gushing. First off is coolant. I got to hit him in the radiator too, I'm sure. And he goes up like that, and I guess the engine went out because his prop is just windmilling, and I scoot up to him really quickly, and just I get up there, he starts to roll, and I'm trying to follow him a little bit. Nothing but smoke in the cockpit. He rolls over there very slowly and comes down, and he's going absolutely vertical.
Wow.
From somewhere 27 to 30,000 feet, just absolutely straight down. And I remember going through 20,000 feet faster than I'd ever been in my life, going too fast. Back on the throttle and started a spiral, watching him as he's going down. Pretty soon I saw his shadow coming over here, and his big smoke trail must have been 5,000 feet long.
Wow.
Shadow met. Just a tremendous explosion.
Wow.
And that was a pretty exciting day. We'd been attacked by 4. We turned the tables on them and shot 3 of them down.
That is a good day.
That's probably my most exciting dogfight, I think.
Yeah, so it sounded like it was pretty long, but how long did that entire process take?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah, maybe several minutes. I mean, it seems like it all happened pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah.
So throughout that process, you kind of a question I want to ask in terms of just an airmanship question is obviously along the way you're becoming a better and better pilot. And would you say that was just because of how often you were flying or the type of flying you were doing? I mean, you eventually got into being a test pilot as well, right?
Correct. Well, I'd say all of the above. You know, it's a funny thing about it. You know, there's a lot of fear that goes into this.
Oh yeah.
You might be killed.
Oh yeah.
And so when you first start, and I didn't get a very satisfactory start as far as that was.
Yeah.
And so just flying over enemy territory, looking down, and oh my God, if I go down here, there's farmers with pitchforks and soldiers and everything, and it's a hostile environment.
Right.
And so then you survive the first 10 missions, and then you get a kill. And that raises your morale and your well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you get some more and you're successful, then it's not nearly as bad. But, it's warfare, and your chances of getting killed are there.
Right. Yeah. Very high, especially those days. You know, World War II is really the last time where we had epic battles like that in the air. You know, I mean, not that we haven't in every war, but it was just on a scale that hasn't been replicated. Yeah.
And one little thing about that, you know, when World War, you think of the tremendous casualty we had. I don't know, we had 16,000 men in uniform, and I forget how many losses we had, but you know, it's pretty high.
Right.
And when you think of losses, you think of the infantry, you think of the Marine Corps, things like that. Well, believe it or not, one of the most dangerous places to be was in the 8th Air Force over Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And why do people not know that? Well, there's the Battle of the Bulge, Normandy.
Right.
There's all these flagpoles, signs out there.
Mm-hmm.
How many casualties they had when they did that? Well, the 8th Air Force, flying starting in 1942 and flying continuously through the end of the war. There's no signposts out there. And the 8th Air Force, one of 17 Air Forces we had in World War II, had more killed, more casualties than the entire Marine Corps had during the entire war.
Jeez, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Wow. Talk to us a little bit about the end of the war and how things kind of wound down and what that was like, what it felt like, where you were, what you did.
Well, I had finished my first tour. By the way, we did not fly like missions, when it had missions or things like that. Our tour was 300 combat hours.
Oh, okay.
And when I finished my 300 hours, I decided I wanted to come back for. I can't really explain it totally, but I just.
So you had the choice to come back or to stay home after those 300 hours?
Well, yes, and no. I got orders, sent me home, and brought me back. But when you got back there, they put you in the pipeline. So when I'm going through this processing center, they come along and said, "Hey, you got to go see a shrink before you can go further." And all he wanted to tell me was, he said, "Do you realize that you do not have to go back to combat? We have thousands of pilots that have not seen combat yet." And I said, "Yeah, I do." So, okay, go. So that's how I got back on a second tour. And I finished that in mid-January 1945. Came home, and the war lasted up through the European War through April.
Right.
And I don't think there was any question about me going to the Pacific. So then that summer, I went to the training command, and when the war ended, these guys had all been there the whole war, and we were the first returnees coming in to replace them.
Wow.
Take their jobs, and they were going to go overseas.
Wow.
And so we weren't too well thought of, and there was quite a bit of friction. But then the war ended, and they canceled all their, the ones that were still there, and shipped us out. And I had to go to recruiting duty for 18 months.
Wow.
Everybody's trying to get out of the service, and I'm supposed to be recruiting them to stay in.
Yeah.
And with a high priority program, you couldn't get out of it. So I served my full 18 months. And then my good friend Chuck Yeager had he had been an escapee. He got shot down in March, found his way out with the help of the French and over into Spain, where he was supposed to be interned. And I think what happened is they traded him for gasoline or
Oh, wow.
something, and he came back to England, and he wanted to finish his combat tour, and they said, "No, you've been down into Free French, with the Free French, and if you went down again, they could torture you and find out some of their tactics." But he went. It was the invasion was already now progressing pretty good, and so he had to go all the way to General Eisenhower. And finally, I think Ike said, "Okay, son, it's your ass. If you want to stay, if you want to go, it's all right with me. If you want to stay, it's all right with me." And so he was able to complete his first tour.
And from what I read in the book, it took you guys a little while to warm up to each other, right? While you were in your fighter group?
Mm-hmm.
So what's the reason behind that? Why did it take so long to warm up to other fellow pilots? Or greenies, I guess.
Well, Chuck came as a brand new pilot. He was in the first bunch of pilots that came into our new fighter group. And so he had some longevity there. But of course, we were all flight leaders and all that, were the guys that had been there the longest time. And he was in a different flight. And our friendship really developed during his completion of his first tour and my second tour.
So the war ended. You went to recruiting duty. Let's talk a little bit about your time as a test pilot and what you did the rest of your career in the military. If you can speak to that.
Well, Chuck Yeager, because he had escaped, got the preference. He and I were in the training command under the same deal. And when I got shipped out to recruiting, he came up on a special program that allowed escapees and POWs to choose their next assignment. So he picked Wright Field, close to West Virginia, but in the flight test field. And in the next 18 months, he made a name for himself. So he put in a name request. He talked to his boss, and they put in a name request for me. And I got recruiting in 18 months. So I went to Wright Field and into the fighter test section. Later became chief of the section. And by the way, I was a major at age 22.
Wow, that's young.
And so when you went somewhere, they had to work you in, a job, a section head or something. And so I went in there as a journeyman test pilot for a while, and then was able to take over the fighter test section.
Now, I mean, there's a ton of history there with being a test pilot. I'm sure you flew a lot of different airplanes. I almost feel disrespectful in going over some of that, in blowing over some of that. Of course, your book, To Fly and Fight, I'll just hold it up to the camera here, is something that is it's pretty thick, has a lot of history in it, and I really encourage people to get in there more and read about some of that history. That said, you went through the test pilot stuff, and now eventually, didn't you actually work in fly in Vietnam as well?
Oh yeah. Let's see. I went from Wright Field to the Pentagon, to the Command and Staff School. From there, I went out to Okinawa, and eventually commanded No, wait a minute. I went off to the Army War College. I got promoted to bird colonel. I came back to Edwards and had a higher job in flight test. And then I went to Okinawa and commanded a F-105 unit. I thought that I would surely go to Vietnam when when my tour was up. I was combat ready, and I was willing to go, expecting to go. But no, I got to go back to the Pentagon. So after I'd been there about 18 months, the colonel's assignment said, "Hey, we've got a requirement to have a bird colonel who's commanded a wing in the past and who is checked out in the airplane." And he says, "Your name popped up," and he says, "You don't have to go. You've got 2 years to go in your 30-year mandatory retirement." And he says, "But I thought I would let you know." And I said, "Hell yes, I'll go. I'll do anything to get out of the Pentagon." and so I went there and had a F-105 unit. It was late in the war, and we weren't going into the north at that time. We were bombing the Ho Chi Minh Trail and all that kind of jazz. And after I accepted, they said, "Oh, we got to tell you one thing. The wing over there is slated to be closed. The base is going to be closed, and it's going to come home." Well, what happens to me then? I said, "Well, you're in the pipeline," and I knew what it meant. It meant I'd go to some of the headquarters around there, Air Force, but I still decided to go, and I'm glad I did. I was, I didn't know any more about the Vietnam War than what all of us knew, reading the papers and things like that. It wasn't a very popular war, and he had drug problems, women in the service, and all things. Besides that, I might get killed too.
Yeah, exactly.
Flying missions. But I went and came back, and that finished off my 30 years.
Well, I've taken up over an hour of your time.
Wow.
And I really appreciate that time, by the way. Could you offer any advice to current or future pilots, whether that's military or civilian life? What would your advice be to people looking to get into aviation?
Well, you can be what you want to be. You can live your dreams. I did it. So I encourage people to, live your dreams, do what you have to do, and find a job that you like to do, and then you can excel in that particular field, no matter what it is.
Very, very short and poignant advice. Well, Bud, I really appreciate you taking the time. Here is your flight jacket. We talked about this. Let's see this. So you got the name on there. So this is going to be in the Smithsonian, is that right?
Yeah. I was back there giving a lecture, and they found out I had some of this stuff, and they wanted to borrow it. And that's my helmet. You can see the rat hole in the top there.
Yeah, a little worn down. Did that just naturally wear down because you wore it so much?
No, it I think a mouse got into it somewhere.
Okay.
But they say they're going to, I forget what year it is, in the next couple of years, they're going to revitalize their World War II thing based on some big anniversary coming up. And we're wondering if they could borrow it from me. And so we decided as long as they'll, use it, they could keep it.
Yeah.
But if they put it in the closet, we're going to take it back.
Yeah. So they're going to borrow it for a while and have it on display, and then they'll give it back to the family.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a good honor. I'm going to be in DC in December, or in October. I wish it was already there. I could go see it.
Maybe we will.
Yeah, maybe I will sometime. Well, but the one thing that my listeners told me when I asked them questions was to thank you for your service. And so from them and myself, thank you so much for what you've done for our country and the 30 years you spent in the military. And not only you, but the many of your friends and colleagues that did it with you. There were plenty of my generation that just really honor that, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I got one little thing we'd like to bring up to you. You
Absolutely. Yep. Go ahead.
We have a marvelous website.
Okay.
My son Jim has manufactured it and maintains it and all that. It's pretty simple. All you got to remember is C.E. Bud Anderson. It's www.cebutteranderson.com.
Perfect.
And I think you'll find it pretty interesting. It'll take you about 4 hours to go through the whole thing.
Yeah, I bet. And this morning, along with the website, this morning I was actually refreshing up on the book and going back through and reading a bunch of your history there. It's hard to put down. There's so much in there, and to hear your words and hear the stories are just really amazing. So I also encourage people to get that. And I'm honored to have your signature in here, so I appreciate that. And I will make sure to get with you and Jim, and we'll make sure that this podcast and this video can be shared on your website as well.
Okay.
So appreciate it. All right. Well, thanks to both of you. Thanks, Jim, there in the background for setting this up, and thank you, Bud, for taking the time.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Hope to shake your hand sometime in the future, maybe at Oshkosh next year.
All right. I'm going to get to escort him next year. My sister did this year.
Okay. Well, let's meet. We'll link up, and we'll have a glass of cold water there in the heat.
All right.
All right, guys. Thanks so much. Take care.
Join us next week for another exciting topic or interview with a great guest. All AviatorCast resources can be found at aviatorcast.com. Subscribe to AviatorCast on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube, and other podcast services. Did you enjoy the show? Review AviatorCast on iTunes or similar service. If your review is aired on the show, we'll send you an official AviatorCast t-shirt. As always, we'd love to hear from you. Write AviatorCast at aviatorcast.com to introduce yourself or to ask any questions you may have about aviation. Now, for the final release clearance, back to Chris Palmer.
All right. It was such a great honor to have Bud Anderson on the podcast today. Bud, thank you for your time and taking the time to speak with us today about your career. I know that we hardly scratched the surface on the type of stories there are to tell. Now, like I said, there is this To Fly and Fight book that goes through a lot more of the journey that Bud went through. We didn't even really touch on his time as a test pilot and in Vietnam and other things that he did in his career. Of course, many of us are very interested in what he did in World War II, and there's so much more information in here about that as well. So, this is just kind of a prompting to get into more information about Bud. Again, their website, their cebudanderson.com, SON on the Anderson. Should be fairly easy to find. Lots of resources there to learn more. And I just really appreciate that Bud is willing to give back to the aviation community. Now, there's this really cool part in the book where Bud talks about one of his former mentors. And it was a guy that showed he and his friend around the airport when he was a young boy and got him into aviation, basically helped light that fire. And if I remember right, his name was Andy Lewis, I think rings a bell, or at least his last name is Lewis. So that is something that, because Bud did that or had that done for him, is something that he's done over the years for other people. So I appreciate him, again, passing along all of this. And especially for our generation, Generation X, millennials, we need to be carrying forward this message and honoring what these men and women did throughout these different theaters of war and how they served our country and served the world in what they're doing, fighting good versus evil. So all from the cockpit of a P-51. It's really quite amazing what these men did. So, Bud, again, I really appreciate it. So for you listeners, again, go out and check To Fly and Fight, and also check out the website. And if you have the opportunity to meet Bud at one of these events that they often do, of course, you can see where those events are going to be on their website, but they're also often at places like Sun and Fun and Oshkosh Air Venture. So check them out there. So thank you so much for joining. This is just one of those podcasts that for me was really inspirational. I hope you got something out of it and really enjoyed, especially when Colonel Anderson was talking about the dogfight that he was going through. I thought that was a really particularly good part. And just, carry on the passion that you have and keep moving forward. And let me know if there's anything I can do to help you along the way. Again, you can always write me at aviatorcast.com. All right. So until next time on another podcast episode, throttle on.